Okay, so some examples of what would constitute deterrence. Okay, so again, I mentioned more passive. I gave the example of maybe at a convenience store, a more passive type deterrent. Things like security policies, acceptable usage guidelines, okay, security education, training, and awareness programs, what I call CETA programs here. I'll be referring to them as CETA programs throughout the rest of the talk. And more active deterrence would be things like actually monitoring and auditing. Okay, so a more active attempt on the organization to actually do something. So now again, monitoring, it wouldn't be considered like a preventative because again, it's not stopping someone from abusing or misusing your resources, but it's telling them, okay, we're detecting it, we're watching it. Again, a more active effort on the part of the organization. And hopefully by them knowing that these type of activities are going on, they'll be less likely to engage in the misuse activity. So again, the difference between the passive and the active deterrence. Okay, so from a theoretical perspective, I'm not sure how interested you all are in the theory part, so I'll quickly go through it. Okay, so theory would say, okay, if you tell someone they're more likely to get caught and the punishment is going to be fairly severe, they're less likely to engage in inappropriate behavior. Okay, so this theory comes from criminology. So the idea is, the same with trying to deter drinking and driving. If you tell individuals, okay, we're going to have police checkpoints or sobriety checkpoints, there's going to be more police around, and the penalties, if you do get caught for drinking and driving, are fairly high, the objective is, okay, that will help decrease that activity. Same theoretical basis we're using here. So with the use of these security countermeasures, as I'm going to call them, and they're really the combination of these passive and active deterrents. Again, so if the organization has more security policies, CETA efforts, security education, training, and awareness efforts, and monitoring, from a theoretical perspective, we say, okay, well that should hopefully increase people's perception of the certainty that they're going to get caught and the severity of the penalty for engaging in these activities, thus decreasing the incidence of IS misuse. Okay, so that would be a theoretical rationale for why these deterrents supposedly should work. Okay. And I have here a research model. Okay, just quickly, this is kind of what I'm looking at in this study. And again, if you have any questions on this, please feel free to raise your hand. I tried to kind of succinctly illustrate what I'm doing here. But you see there on the left this user awareness of, and it says security policies, CETA programs, and computer monitoring. So in this study, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about actually how it was carried out. But we're looking at if individuals in the organization know that there's these security policies in place, that they know, that they're aware of these CETA efforts, okay, so they're getting constant communication and education on security type matters, and also if they know they're being monitored, there's a relationship between that and their perceived certainty of sanctions, or certainty, you can think of sanctions as punishment, the perception that they will be caught for engaging in IS misuse, and also the severity. So those things on the left there, the deterrence, the policies, CETA programming, monitoring, have a positive relationship on perceptions of certainty of sanctions and severity of sanctions. So basically these type of things should make people feel more likely that they're going to get caught and punished. And then towards the right of the diagram, where it says H1A and H1B, those stand for hypothesis 1A and hypothesis 1B. I'm predicting that, okay, and then this perceived certainty of sanctions and perceived severity of sanctions, as that's increased, the likelihood of IS misuse will decrease. Okay, so that's what that model is trying to emphasize. And I have there a couple other things, control variables. Basically what that means is over and above the effects of individuals' age, gender, their moral commitment, which is a level of how moral they say they are, and the organization they work in. So we're kind of saying, controlling for those factors, these are the things we're looking at in this study. Yep.
Can you describe the deterrents? Are those indicator variables, or how are you measuring that?
Yeah, so they will be measured, actually, they're measured on a Likert type scale, which is a scale of like 1 to 7. So basically in the survey, you know what, let me go through the survey in more detail, and if that's still not clear, please raise your hand again. Okay, so without thinking too much about the methods of how this is carried out, this is the relationships we're trying to look at. I'm trying to look at this point. Anybody else have anything? So you can see the part there with the perceived certainty and severity. That's basically just a copy of that deterrence theory that theory from criminology. And then kind of there's been an extension to that on the left, and looking at the impact of these deterrents. Okay. So here's the study to actually measure. Oh, and I should point out one other thing here where it says IS misuse intention. Okay, this is kind of a limitation of some of this research, but when we're asking people, okay, do you engage in these misuse activities? Well, I didn't have access to actual incidents of people engaging in these bad activities, right? So in the survey, we give them a few scenarios, actually 4 scenarios, and we ask them how likely would it be that you would engage in these type of activities. So that's where it says IS misuse intention. It's kind of considered a proxy, or something to measure behavior. But again, it's not their actual behavior; it's what they say they would do. Similar type methodology that's used like in marketing studies and things like that. So it's kind of as close as you can get without actually getting your hands on actual behavior. Again, in this type of research, if you go into an organization, you say, can you give me logs of your actual insiders who have engaged in some type of computer abuse? Most likely, unless you're buddies with the CEO, they're going to say, no, I'm not giving you that information, or else we don't even have that information. So this is kind of one way to try to get at that. Okay, so how we measure misuse intention in this study. It's basically individuals were given 4 scenarios, okay? And one of them involved sending an inappropriate email, one of them involved software piracy, one of them involved unauthorized access, and another involved unauthorized modification. Okay, so they were presented with these scenarios, and together, their answers, after each one of these scenarios, they were then asked 2 questions regarding their intention. If they were in the same position, would they behave in the same manner? Okay. And again, based on the theory there, we predict that perceived certainty of sanctions would be negatively related to misuse intention. Perceived severity of sanctions would also be. So basically we're saying, okay, the higher the certainty and severity of sanctions, the less likely individuals would say they would engage in those scenario behaviors. Okay, those 4 behaviors there. Okay, I'll quickly, these are basically the same relationships that are outlined in that model. Okay. The one thing I didn't mention before, the control variables, why I even put them in there, again, when I was saying over and above the impact of these other factors, we're trying to look at the impact of the deterrence and the perceived certainty and severity of sanctions. Research, there's a lot of research to suggest that younger individuals and males are more likely to engage in risky or inappropriate type activity. There's a lot of research from social psychology, from criminology, from sociology. So we kind of know that probably males are more likely to engage in misuse, and younger people in general. So I'm kind of over and above those factors. Now that's an interesting thing to look at in and of itself, and I kind of have the data to do that if I want to. But I was kind of trying to look at the impact of these deterrents, the policies, the CETA programs, and the monitoring, without getting their impact mixed in with these other demographic factors. So when we say we control for that, there's a way statistically to kind of account for that. Okay. And the same with moral commitment. Moral commitment, I use that term because, again, that's something that's used a lot in the behavioral type IS security literature. But basically, it's how moral people say they are. And there's a way I measured that in the study as well. Okay. And really, the way I measured it in the study was after each one of those scenarios, there was a question, and it asked individuals, how morally acceptable do you think this activity was? And that was on a scale of 1 to 7. Okay. So we have a measure of that. And then organization, again, there was individuals from 8 different organizations participated in this study. So that organization would be whether they were in organization 1 through 8. Okay, controlled for that as well. So above the impact of these factors. Okay. So the scenarios, okay, so again, for each scenario, each one of those 4 scenarios afterwards, there was 2 questions that measured the perceived certainty of sanctions. Okay, and it would basically be a question, and it would be like on a scale of 1 to 7. It would say, how likely would it be if you were to engage in this same activity that you would be caught in your organization? 2 questions worded a little differently, but that's what they were trying to get at. The perceived severity of sanctions, same idea. It would say, how likely or how severe do you think the punishment would be if you were caught for engaging in this activity, whether it be software piracy, the unauthorized modification, the unauthorized access, in your organization. And the intention would be, the questions would be, how likely would you engage in these activities? Okay, so those were all measured on